I was 23 years old when I walked my little brother to his first day of kindergarten. I was the one who packed his lunch, peanut butter no jelly, because he hated the way jelly made the bread wet. I was the one who sat in the plastic chair outside the classroom until the teacher came out and told me he'd stopped crying. I was the one who drove him to soccer practice, helped him with algebra, stayed up until 2 in the morning sewing a costume for his school play because he'd forgotten to tell me until the night before. I was the one who was there, every single day, for 18 years. And then, on the most important day of my life, in front of 200 people, my little brother stood up at the reception, raised his glass, and turned to the woman who had abandoned us both when he was 3 years old. And he called her Mom. The room went silent. My new husband's hand found mine under the table, and I sat very still, the way you sit when something breaks inside you so completely that moving feels dangerous. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there with a champagne flute in my hand and thought about a folder sitting in my attorney's office. A folder I had put there 6 months earlier, just in case. It turned out I had been right to plan ahead, because what happened in the 48 hours after that toast didn't just change my relationship with my brother, it changed everything. My name is Lauren Calloway. I'm 41 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, with my husband Daniel and our 2 daughters, who are 7 and 4, and who will never in their lives wonder whether someone is going to show up for them. I will make sure of that personally. This is the story of how I became a mother at 20 years old without giving birth. How I gave 18 years of my life to someone who eventually chose the woman who left us both, and how I learned, slowly, painfully, and then all at once, that loving someone completely does not obligate you to accept whatever they give you in return. This story is long. It earns its length. Stay with me. I need to take you back to the summer I was 20 years old, because that's where this story actually starts. Not at the wedding, not at the toast. Back to a Tuesday night in July when I was home from my second year of college, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, and my mother walked out of our house with a single rolling suitcase and didn't come back. I heard the door. I remember that. The particular sound of our front door closing, which had a loose handle that rattled slightly if you didn't lift it just right. I heard the rattle. I heard the absence of it. And then I heard my brother. Ethan was 3 years old. He had just learned to say full sentences, the kind of sentences where you can already hear the person he was going to become. Curious, a little dramatic, deeply sincere. He woke up crying that night, the way 3-year-olds cry when they're disoriented, not sure what's wrong, just sure that something is. I went to his room. I picked him up. I stood in the dark with him against my shoulder until he stopped. My father found my mother's note on the kitchen counter the next morning. I wasn't in the room when he read it, but I heard him read it, heard the silence that followed it, which is its own kind of sound. He came to find me in the kitchen where I was making Ethan's breakfast, scrambled eggs, the way he liked them, slightly too done because he didn't like them wet either, which I only now realize is a pattern, and he handed me the note without saying anything. It said she needed to find herself, that she loved us but couldn't be what we needed. She hoped we'd understand someday. Ethan was eating his eggs. He had a plastic spoon he insisted on using for everything, including eggs, which didn't work well, but which he was committed to. He was watching a cartoon on the small kitchen TV. He did not know yet that the shape of his life had just changed permanently. My father sat down at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands. He was 51 years old, and had worked at the same factory for 23 years, and had never, in my entire memory, asked anyone for anything. He was not a man who knew how to fall apart, so he did the only other thing available to him. He kept going. He went to work. He paid the bills. He came home. He ate the dinners I learned to cook that summer. He watched the news. He went to bed. He was present, and he was absent at the same time, in the way that grief makes people present and absent. He was there. He just wasn't available. And someone had to be available. Ethan needed someone to be available. So I was. I want to be honest about what those first months looked like, because I think people sometimes imagine sacrifice as noble in the moment, And it usually isn't. It's usually just Tuesday. I had planned to go back to college in September. I had a roommate, a double major I was building slowly, a life that was taking shape. I made 3 phone calls in the first 2 weeks, to my academic advisor, to the financial aid office, and to my roommate, who was kind about it in the way that people are kind when they don't quite understand the thing you're telling them. I deferred my enrollment. Just a semester, I told myself, just until things stabilize. That semester became a year. That year became 3. By the time I actually went back, I was 24. I was taking night classes, and Ethan was old enough to stay with my father in the evenings, but young enough that I still called home at 9 to make sure he'd done his homework. People have asked me, over the years, whether I resented it, whether I felt robbed of something. The honest answer is complicated. I didn't resent Ethan. Not once, not for a single day. I resented the situation. I resented my mother for creating it. I resented the fact that my 20s happened in pieces. In early mornings before he woke up. In lunch breaks. In the 2 hours after he went to bed before I was too tired to use them. I resented that I had to build my life in the margins of someone else's. But I never resented him. He was 3 years old. He didn't ask for any of it either. What he did was love me the way children love the people who show up for them, completely, without analysis, without awareness of the cost. He called me Lore, which was what he'd called me since he could talk. He saved things for me. Drawings from school, interesting rocks, the good part of whatever he was eating. When I came home from class, he would wait by the door. Not because anyone told him to, just because. That kind of love is not nothing. It's actually everything. I want to make sure that's clear before the rest of this story. I'm going to move through the years more quickly now, not because they weren't significant, but because the shape of them is probably familiar to anyone who has ever been the one who stayed. For the first several years, our household ran on a quiet, unspoken arrangement. My father worked. I managed everything else. He was consistent and steady in the ways that mattered. The bills got paid, the lights stayed on, dinner happened. But the emotional architecture of our home, the homework and the bedtimes and the permission slips, and the parent-teacher conferences, that was mine. When Ethan was in middle school, my father's health began to shift. Not catastrophically. High blood pressure first, managed with medication and stubbornness in equal measure. Then, a minor cardiac event at 61 that scared us all into paying attention. He recovered, but the recovery was slow, and the doctor's language was careful in the way that careful language always means something. He scaled back at work. He moved more slowly. He was still my father, still present, still steady in his way, but the weight of the household redistributed itself again, and I absorbed the new portion without discussing it, because discussing it would have meant acknowledging something none of us were ready to name. I finished my degree at 26. I built a career in human resources. Appropriate, everyone said, because I had apparently always been good at managing complicated people in complicated situations, which is a polite way of saying I had practice. I was good at my job. I was promoted. I bought a small house at 31, the first person in my immediate family to own property, which felt significant in a way I didn't have language for at the time. Ethan grew up. This is the part that's both the point and the miracle. He grew up. He was a good kid, genuinely. Not just in the way that people say kids are good kids. He was kind to people with less than him. He was funny in a dry, quiet way that snuck up on you. He worked hard in school without being pushed, which I considered a personal triumph. He made friends who were decent people. He had a girlfriend at 17 who treated him well, and whom I liked genuinely. And he talked about our mother occasionally, more as he got older, the way kids do when they start trying to construct their own history. He had almost no memory of her. He was 3. What he had was questions, and a photograph on his phone that someone had given him at some point, and a story he was building in his own head from parts that didn't quite fit together. I answered his questions honestly, without editorializing, which was the hardest thing I did in 18 years. I told him she left. I told him I didn't know exactly why. I told him that whatever her reasons were, they were hers, and that his life and my love for him had nothing to do with her choices. I believed that. I still believe it. What I didn't fully account for was that he was building something in his head that I couldn't see, and that one day I would find out what it was. Before I tell you about our mother coming back, I need to tell you about my grandmother. Because the order of things matters, and this happened first. My grandmother passed away when I was 38, 3 years before the wedding, 2 years before our mother reappeared. She was my father's mother, a small, precise woman who had survived things I only knew in outline, and who had the particular toughness of people who have earned it, rather than performed it. She left me a sum of money that was significant enough to matter, and modest enough that I almost felt guilty about it, which she would have found ridiculous. She also left me, in a separate envelope delivered by her attorney, a letter. It was 2 pages. It covered practical things, her wishes for certain objects, a note about a piece of jewelry she wanted me to give my father, and then, at the end, something I have read many times since. "Lauren," she wrote, "you have spent a long time giving. At some point, giving without protecting yourself becomes something other than generosity. Make sure what you have built cannot be taken from you. Your grandmother is not naive about who takes things. She had never once said my mother's name to me directly. She didn't say it in the letter. She didn't need to. I used part of her money to sit down with an estate planning attorney named Marcus Webb and build a structure I hoped I would never need to use. I had been thinking about it for years, in the way you think about things you don't quite want to acknowledge you're thinking about. My grandmother's letter gave me permission to stop pretending I wasn't. The structure wasn't complicated. A family trust, carefully drafted, covering the assets I had built. My house, my savings, the investment account I had been contributing to for 11 years, designated beneficiaries, specific language about what could and couldn't be contested and by whom. Marcus asked me all the right questions and I answered them plainly, and at the end he asked me the question that good attorneys always ask. Is there a specific scenario you're trying to protect against? I thought about my grandmother's letter. I thought about the woman who had driven away with a rolling suitcase and the 17-year-old gap she had left in our lives. Not a scenario, I said. A person. I didn't say her name. The folder went into Marcus's office. I paid the bill, I went home and made dinner, and didn't think about it again for 2 years. Until our mother came back. And then, 6 months after that, the wedding. Our mother reappeared when Ethan was 21. Not dramatically, no knock on the door, no tearful airport scene. She sent him a message on Instagram, a short one, from what he told me. Said she'd been thinking about him, said she hoped he was well, said she'd understand if he didn't want to respond. He responded. He told me about it 3 weeks later, after they'd already exchanged several messages. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same kitchen table where I had made his eggs on the morning she left, and he told me with the careful, slightly guilty expression of someone delivering news they know will land badly. I sat with it for a moment. Then I asked how he felt about it. He said he didn't know. He said he was curious. He said he knew it was complicated. He said he wasn't trying to replace anything. He looked at me the whole time he said these things, which I understood to mean that by anything he meant me. I told him I understood. I told him his relationship with her was his to build or not build as he chose. I told him that whatever he decided, I supported him. Then he left, and I sat at that table for a long time, and I was honest with myself in the way you can only be alone, in your own kitchen, with no one watching. I was afraid. Not jealous exactly. Afraid. Afraid of what she would tell him. Afraid of the version of events she might offer. The version where she'd had reasons, where circumstances had been hard, where she'd been a person with a story, rather than a woman who left her 3-year-old son and drove away with a rolling suitcase. Afraid that the story she told would be easier to hold than the truth, and that Ethan, who had grown up without her, might need an easier story. I didn't say any of this to him. I didn't have the right to say it. The folder was already in Marcus's office. The fence was already built. All I could do was watch. I should tell you about Daniel, because he is not a footnote in this story. He is actually the reason the story ends the way it does. I met Daniel at 36, which felt late to me at the time, and feels exactly right to me now. He was a high school history teacher with a specific kind of patience that you can't fake, the kind that comes from spending your days with people who are still figuring out who they are and choosing to find that worthwhile rather than exhausting. He was funny and quiet and made very good coffee, and had no interest whatsoever in performing a version of himself for anyone's approval, which I found almost disorienting at first, because I had spent so many years around people who performed constantly. He knew about Ethan from our third date. He knew about my mother from our fifth. He knew about the years, all of them, the full shape of them, before we had been together 3 months, because I was 36 years old, and I had learned that the only way to know if someone can actually hold your life is to let them try. He held it, completely, without making it about himself, without offering to fix things that weren't broken, without the particular discomfort some people have with a woman who has already handled the hard things herself. He just listened and then, at the end, asked me what I needed. Nobody had asked me that in a very long time. We got engaged on a Tuesday, which is appropriate for us. Not a special Tuesday. Just a Tuesday evening on my back porch with mediocre wine and the dogs from next door barking at something in the hedges. He had the ring in his jacket pocket. He'd apparently been carrying it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and eventually concluded, correctly, that we were not a right moment kind of people. We were a Tuesday kind of people. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I asked Ethan to walk me down the aisle. Not as a groomsman, as my escort, the person who walks the bride in, the role that in another life might have belonged to a father, or a mother, or someone who had been there all along. My father was there, was seated in the front row, was emotional in the contained way he's emotional about everything, but I wanted Ethan beside me for that walk. He was 24 by then. He had grown into someone I genuinely liked, not just loved. I was proud of him in the way you're proud of something you had a hand in building. He said yes immediately. He teared up, which he then spent 5 minutes pretending hadn't happened. I didn't know when I asked him that our mother had been in his life for nearly 2 years by then. I didn't know she had met him in person several times. I didn't know she had been asking about the wedding. I found that out at the wedding. The ceremony was everything I had wanted it to be, which surprised me, because I am not a person who places enormous faith in things going according to plan. The flowers were right. Daniel cried at the altar in a way that made everyone else cry. Ethan walked me down the aisle with his arms straight and his chin up, and I could feel him trying very hard to be steady for me, which is the same thing I had done for him for 18 years, and I didn't say that out loud because it would have undone us both. The reception was at a venue on a lake, which Daniel had chosen because he knows I calm down near water. There was dinner, and dancing, and the particular organized happiness of 200 people who have been fed and are genuinely rooting for the couple in question. I was happy. Specifically, clearly, bodily happy, which is different from contentedly happy or quietly happy. I was the kind of happy you can feel in your hands. Then came the toasts. Daniel's best friend went first. Funny, warm, mercifully brief. Daniel's mother went second. Also brief, mostly tearful, entirely sincere. Then my maid of honor, my friend Priya, who had known me since college and who gave a toast that was funny and true and made me laugh at myself in the best way. Then Ethan stood up. He looked handsome. He had gotten a haircut he'd been resistant to, and which I had suggested 3 times, and it looked good, and I made a mental note to mention this later. He cleared his throat. He held his champagne glass with both hands, the way he does when he's nervous, and he started to speak. The first part was beautiful. He talked about growing up. He talked about the lunches and the homework and the school play costume. He talked about what it meant to have someone who showed up. He said I had been more than a sister. He said some things that I will not repeat here because they belong to me privately. In the good way. I was crying by the 3rd sentence. Daniel handed me a handkerchief, which he had in his pocket on purpose because he knows me. And then Ethan paused. He turned. He turned to a table near the back of the room, a table I had not arranged, with a chair and place settings that had appeared without my knowledge. and he raised his glass toward a woman sitting there, a woman I had not seen in 21 years, a woman with my brother's eyes, and a dress that was slightly too formal for the occasion. And he said, "I also want to thank someone who couldn't be here for most of my life, but who is here now. Mom, thank you for coming." The room did not gasp. It went something quieter than a gasp. It went still. 200 people simultaneously understanding that something had just happened that they did not have enough information to process. I did not turn around. I did not look at her. I held Daniel's hand under the table, and I pressed my thumbnail into my palm. Hard, because I needed something to focus on that wasn't my face. Ethan finished his toast. He sat down. The DJ, bless him, read the room and put on something gentle and instrumental, and the moment passed the way terrible moments at parties pass, absorbed into the general noise, papered over with movement and refilled glasses. My mother-in-law appeared at my elbow and asked if I was all right. I told her I was. She stayed near me for the rest of the evening, which is one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me without being asked. I did not speak to my mother that night. She left before the cake. I don't know if she saw me not looking at her. I don't know what she told herself about the evening. I do know that when I went to the bathroom at 10 o'clock and stood alone at the sink for 4 minutes, I thought about Marcus Webb's office and the folder inside it, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Ready. Ethan called me the morning after the wedding. I was at the hotel with Daniel, eating room service breakfast in bathrobes, which was possibly the most deliberately normal thing I have ever done. I let it go to voicemail. He called again that afternoon. I was in the car heading home, Daniel driving, my hand out the window in the air the way I do when I need to reset. I let it go to voicemail again. He texted Laure, "I know you're upset. Can we please talk?" I texted back, "I'm not upset. I need a few days. I'll call you." Daniel said nothing, which is one of the things I love most about him. 2 days later, I called Marcus Webb instead of Ethan. I told him what had happened at the wedding. He listened without interrupting, which is what good attorneys do. Then he asked one question. "Has anything changed in your asset situation since we last updated the documents?" I told him no. "Then everything is in order," he said. "The structure holds regardless of whatever family developments arise. You don't have to do anything right now." I thanked him. I hung up, and then I called Ethan. We talked for 2 hours. It was the hardest conversation of my relationship with him, and also, strangely, one of the most honest ones. He cried. I did not cry, which cost me something. He told me he hadn't known how to tell me she was coming. He told me he thought it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission, which is something only someone who has never faced real consequences would say, and I told him so, gently. He laughed through tears, which was very him. I told him what I had never told him, what it had actually cost. Not as an accusation, as information. The deferred college, the margins, the years that happened in pieces. I told him that I loved him completely, and that loving him completely did not mean that what happened at the wedding was acceptable. I told him those two things could both be true. He said he understood. I believed him mostly. Then I told him about the folder. Not to threaten him. He wasn't in the folder as a threat. He was in the folder as a reality, as someone I had chosen to include in my life and my assets, because I had spent 18 years choosing him. I told him that the folder existed. I told him what was in it. I told him what would and wouldn't be accessible to people outside the trust, which included his mother, regardless of whatever relationship he chose to build with her. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You planned ahead." "I always plan ahead," I said. "You know that." Another silence. "She told me you probably had," he said quietly. "She said you were always the practical one." I let that sit between us for a moment. "She's not wrong," I said. "I want to tell you where things stand now, because I think you deserve the full shape of the story. Ethan and I are still close, not the same as before, that particular version of us, where I was the one who showed up by default and he was the one who was shown up for. That version ended at the wedding, which maybe it needed to. What we have now is more equal, more negotiated. More honest. He calls me Lore. I still answer. We had Thanksgiving together this past November, just him and me and Daniel and the girls, at my house, and I made his eggs the way he likes them, and he made a joke about it that made Daniel laugh, and it was fine. More than fine. My mother exists in Ethan's life, and that is his choice to make, and I have made my peace with watching it from a distance. She has not contacted me. I have not contacted her. The folder ensures that whatever she is building with my brother does not include access to what I spent 20 years building myself. That is enough. It has to be enough. My father is still with us. Slower now, quieter, spending most days in the house he's known for 30 years. I call him every Sunday. Sometimes we talk for an hour. Sometimes we watch the same game in separate houses and text about it. It is ordinary and it is everything. Daniel asked me once, after all of it, after the calls and the attorney and the long quiet evenings when I was processing things I didn't have words for yet, he asked me if I would do it all again. The 18 years, the lunches, the algebra, the costume at 2 in the morning. I thought about it honestly, which took longer than a clean answer would suggest. Then I said yes. Not because it was fair. It wasn't fair. Not because it didn't cost me things I didn't get back. It did, but because Ethan grew up. Because he became someone worth knowing. Because the little boy who ate scrambled eggs with a plastic spoon became a man who cried at his sister's wedding and meant every word before the one that broke her heart. That happened. I was part of making that happen. No folder, no trust document, no legal structure can take that from me. And nothing, not a toast, not a woman in a too formal dress who showed up 21 years too late, changes the fact that I was the one who was there. I was always the one who was there. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Would you have cut him off completely, or done what Lauren did? And if you're new here, subscribe. Every week, a story about the people who give everything, and what happens when they finally decide what they're worth.